Another day, another book turned movie. You know, this genre of film is certainly bountiful, as there are seemingly no end to the amount of movies that are based on books. But what keeps me invested in this video series is learning that many of the books I thought were completely original were actually adapted from books all along. Just like today's topic, The Iron Giant. The film released in 1999, and unfortunately, a well-known box office failure, which is attributed to a few different reasons. From poor marketing decisions due to Warner Brothers' lack of faith in the film, as well as an interest in moving away from traditional 2D animated films and more towards the rise of computer-generated ones. After all, the first Toy Story film released a few years prior and made nearly $400 million. Which blew away a lot of the 2D films that were released after it. Despite The Iron Giant's terrible performance though, the box office results meant very little in the long term. The home video releases of the movie cemented The Iron Giant as a fan-favorite film, which is still being admired to this day. Even Warner Brothers, the very company who screwed the movie over, has started taking advantage of the fan reception, with The Iron Giant making cameos in movies like Ready Player One and Space Jam 2. They even added the character in Multiverses. So it's just really nice to see this coming from the exact same company who sabotaged the movie to begin with. But enough about Warner Brothers and the dumpster fire they're currently in. Instead, let's focus on the film that this has been all about. The Iron Giant takes place in the 1950s, during the Cold War. The passion for the military wartime aesthetic was as high as the booming science fiction scene. There has been a lot of sci-fi movies that have used this time period's aesthetic, but The Iron Giant is definitely one of the more pleasing ones. Taking place in a small town, every scene just feels very cozy and at home. So it's rather unfortunate that this peaceful town would meet the impact of an extraterrestrial giant robot. Given the government's paranoia at the time, it doesn't take long for them to hit the scene. However, a young boy named Hogarth had already taken the robot in. The two become quick friends, and Hogarth helps feed the giant and teaches it all about Earth life. Just like before, the peace doesn't last long, as the robot eventually has to face the purpose of its creation, alongside the ever-pursuing government who is willing to nuke a small town just to rid themselves of the problem. The giant sacrifices itself to save everyone, proving that it could defy its nature and be a true hero. And the movie ends on a hopeful note as the robot is seen slowly putting itself back together. It's a very sweet movie with lots of passion behind it, and it will always stand tall as one of the last shining beacons of traditional animation. But I know you didn't come here just to hear another YouTuber praise the film. Instead, let's talk about the book that made it all possible. The Iron Giant released back in 1968, going under the name The Iron Man. This book was originally released in the UK, but when the book was published in America, they did have to change its name to The Iron Giant for exactly the reason you think they did. But in my opinion, The Iron Giant's just a better name anyways. The book was written by Ted Hughes, who was more of a poet than an author. He only wrote a few books in his lifetime, as most of his work was going towards his poetry, with The Iron Man being one of his first books he ever wrote. And if you look at most of his other work, it's actually an incredible, jarring transition. Ted's previous material usually revolved around themes of nature and simplistic environments, which were inspired by his countryside home as a child. They tended to either be very grounded in nature or were more symbolic and abstract. So it's interesting to go from that genre to a very sci-fi leaning story like The Iron Man. Well, you know, actually, I suppose it's not too heavy in the sci-fi theming. The setting is still in line with his other works, but regardless, it's quite a contrast from what he's made prior. The Iron Man opens up with the Iron Giant himself, standing at the very top of a cliff before jumping off and... Yeah, okay. So, this aspect of the film is going to be a bit difficult to talk about, not just due to the subject matter, but also because YouTube doesn't really like channels talking about this sort of thing. So, I'm not going to fully mention the term for what's going on, but you can pick up the context clues as we go along. This opening of the book actually ties into the reason why Ted wrote it in the first place. This short story was written specifically for Ted's two children, who were mourning the loss of their mother after she had, well, you know. With that context in mind, the opening of the book, as well as the ending of the movie, starts to paint a picture about what was really going on behind the scenes of its creation. But if you've seen the movie, then you already know this is far from the end of the story. After the Iron Giant crashed at the bottom of the cliff, it had begun to piece itself back together. A while later, a boy named Hogarth arrived at the cliff to go fishing when he spotted the giant off in the distance. He ran home as fast as he could to tell his family of the Iron Man he saw, which his father goes out to look for. The next day, the farmers notice how their tractors, fences, and tools have bites taken out of them. This is enough evidence to prove that the giant exists, and so everyone bands together to capture the giant. They dig a giant hole and wait for it to fall in. Meanwhile, Hogarth feels like the monster isn't really that bad, as everyone keeps making it out to be. So he offers a solution that everyone would agree to. He offers the giant a home in a junkyard, giving it a place to stay and all of the metal it could eat. This agreement seems to please everyone, and so far this story actually has been very similar to the movies. You can easily pick up on all the scenes that correlate between the two, especially the part with the giant space dragon. 'Cause yeah, that's where this story's headed. So, Earth's top scientists start to panic about what appears to be a star approaching Earth, when in reality, the so-called star was actually a giant space bat angel dragon thing. The creature is described in a really weird way, but the official art of it makes it look like a normal dragon. So I'll just refer it to the creature as that going forward. The dragon arrives on Earth, demanding that the Earthlings give it something to eat, or it'll instead devour their cities. In the wake of this new threat, the Iron Giant travels to Australia, of all places, in order to protect its newfound friends. Unfortunately, the giant knew he couldn't defeat the monster in a fight, so instead, he decides to challenge it to a contest to prove which of them was truly the strongest. The challenge was simple. Each of them would take turns laying in the hottest fires available. The giant would lay drenched in rocket fuel, while the dragon, to match its size, would lay in the sun. First one to give up would become a slave to the winner. With the rules set, they both take their first turn in the fire, and both come out alive and very confident. Round 2 is where things start to get a little heated. The Iron Giant puts on a tough demeanor, acting as if the fire is nothing to him, when truthfully, he is terrified. At the start of the book, it was shown that the giant did not fear death. He could be broken into hundreds of pieces and still be put back together. But for the first time in his life, he wondered if he'd ever get put back together. And, more importantly, what would happen to those he loved once he was gone. Despite this, he kept up his tough act until his turn was up, and that was when it was the dragon's turn. And this would be the end of their contest. The dragon fell back down to Earth, its wings completely singed to a crisp. It admitted defeat as it can no longer stand the intense heat of the sun. The giant inquires to the dragon why it decided to go after the Earth. The dragon claimed that it's part of a peaceful species who loves to make music across the universe. But when it listened to all the noise coming from Earth, all of the hatred and wars, it got excited and just wanted to join in. The giant then inquires to the dragon to sing one of their species' songs for the people of Earth. The melody, so peaceful and heartwarming that the leaders of every nation consider trying to establish world peace. And the book ends with the Iron Giant singing along with the dragon, bringing a single moment of peace across Earth. And that was the Iron Man. Reading this book was a very interesting experience. I've heard a lot of people talk about the book, describing it as being completely different from the film, highlighting the whole space dragon thing at the end. But after reading it, I can say it's not as cut and dry as they made it out to be. Let's start with one of the book's bigger differences: the setting. This movie is set in 1950s America. However, the book is set in 1960s England. While this sounds like a really big change, it kind of isn't. The reason why I didn't mention this detail before is because it really doesn't matter much in the grand scheme of things. In the movie, it is immediately obvious where the story takes place, and that time period plays a crucial role in major aspects of the plot. But in the book, the time period and location don't really get explored. All we're told is that the movie takes place in a small farming town, and that could take place anywhere in the world. Although, it's worth pointing out that the book's climax is moved to Australia, and that's where the space dragon landed. But just like in the original setting, it doesn't really matter too much in the grand scheme of things. So if you went into the book thinking it took place in America, there really isn't too much to contradict that. Another notable difference between the book and the movie is the characters. The book's primary focus is on the Iron Giant himself, so a majority of the characters introduced in the film were original ones. Heck, even Hogarth's mom is only mentioned once or twice in the book. Meanwhile, his dad, who was cut entirely from the film, was far more involved in the plot than her. The only character that really carried over from the book is Hogarth, but even his role in the story was significantly less refined than it was in the movie. He's the first person to see the giant. He helps out with capturing it, and then he comes up with the idea of where to keep it, so that sums up his involvement in the story. That being said, even though he only has a minor role, everything he did still happened in the movie, such as him meeting the giant and hiding him out in a junkyard. Up until the last chapter, the movie can be seen as an expansion of the book's plot, filling out the plot threads as well as making some minor changes by adding in more characters or plot points. But even then, the climax of the books still has parallels to the film. There's an extraterrestrial creature from space who freaks out the world's governments, causing them to retaliate with military force. The Iron Giant's origins were a mystery in the book, so it seems like aspects of the space dragon plot were reworked for him. In the end, I think the movie is an overall better story, taking the plot points from the book to craft a very emotional masterpiece. But that in no way devalues the original story. It's a beautiful tale about perseverance in the face of death, and it even hits harder knowing the context behind the book's creation. Unfortunately, the author had passed away a few years before the film was completed, but his children got to see it, and they loved what they saw. A really sweet ending to this whole journey. Anyhow, I think that's all I have to say on this topic. If you'd like to see more videos like this, where I discuss the source material of some animated films, then be sure to let me know in the comments below. And subscribing would really help support the content we make. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you in the next video.